Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of Suit Up, the Warframe frame review series. Today we're going to be taking a look at a frame that remains still possibly my favourite, and easily my most used frame, the mistress of minds and manipulation, Nyx Prime. Now Nyx was released into the game at the time I actually started playing the game, and was the first frame that I actively farmed for after getting my starter frame. Once I had her, I literally played with no other frame for the next 6 months or more. The parts for her now, for the standard frame, can be farmed from the Forehead boss in the Infested Invasions, and the link to her Prime drop tables are in the description below the video. So what do you get when you manage to put the Prime together? Well, you get a frame that isn't the most survivable, 300 health at rank 30 and 375 shield. The Prime does get an increase of her armour from a rather pathetic 15 up to 50, but this isn't remotely good enough to mod for. Although it does mean she isn't immediately dead as soon as an enemy looks at her. She also gets an above average energy pool of 225 and a pretty decent sprint speed of 1.125. Now that energy pool is going to be hugely useful, combining that with something like Prime Flow, since she is a very ability heavy frame, relying a lot on those for both survivability and crowd control. So talking about abilities, I have reviewed each of the augments previously, and I won't take out more time in this video to go through them again, so I will leave the links to the modular episodes in the description below so you can check those out. Now onto her abilities. Her first ability is Mind Control, where Nyx will invade the mind of a target within 60 meters, forcing them to fight for her and her team for 30 seconds. The range is affected by power range, duration affected by duration mods. Mind-controlled enemies can obviously be damaged by enemy fire, but they can also be affected by friendly fire, although not directly. Any damage done to the mind-controlled target will be stored and then applied as soon as the mind control runs out. This means you can make sure that you don't have the target that you controlled just turn around and waste you as soon as the mind control runs out. Another important thing to note is that only one target can be controlled at once, although this can be toggled if you do control the wrong one, or it outlives its usefulness. This ability is one that I don't see many Nyx players using effectively, if at all, but a well-timed and a strategic mind control can be of a huge use to your team. For example, Eximus auras then work for your team. Ancient healer damage reduction affects your teammates and yourself. Shield drones give you more shield to absorb more damage. Enemies that spawn others like Broodmothers or the crazy cat ladies will spawn units that will fight for your side. Even if it's not to use an enemy just for your side, if you don't have much energy, mind controlling a unit that's trying to cap an interception can be the difference between losing a point and not losing the point. There are so many situations where I find mind control can be an absolute lifesaver, yet it's not an ability I see used much, which is a shame, because it's an ability that I find to be absolutely amazing. Used effectively, it can be a fantastic addition to the team, and something that can turn the tide of a fight, or take some fire away from Nyx herself, with nothing more than a simple, well-timed and well-placed mind control. Moving on from that, her second ability is Psychic Bolts, where she will throw out 6 bolts of telekinetic energy that will seek enemies out and hit them for 200 slash damage, with a 10% status chance on impact with the target to proc slash, and then a 50% chance to deal a radiation proc in a 15 meter radius from the targets that get hit by the bolts. The bolts themselves will go through cover if Nyx has line of sight on the enemy, or if the enemy has recently broken line of sight. And that's about it for this ability. There's really not a lot to it, but honestly, it's pretty pants. The damage is absolutely terrible. It's like a vastly worse version of Shuriken. Literally, the only vaguely redeeming feature of this ability is that potential for a rad proc, but that's RNG whether you'll actually get it or not. 50% chance is okay, and over 6 bolts you're probably going to get at least one, but the ability in general just isn't reliable enough to be used that often. It's not something I use very much, unless I'm messing about with the augment, which at least makes this ability bearable and usable in certain situations, but without it, the base ability is pretty awful. Now, onto her main event, the ability that she is known for, Chaos. Nyx unleashes a radial burst of psychic energy, invading the minds of everyone in a range of 25 meters making everyone in that range see everybody else as Tenno for 25 seconds, initially stunning everybody in range and then causing them to fight between themselves. The duration of the ability is affected by duration mods and the radius by range mods. The affected enemies by this ability will attack each other with any given weapon that they have, or use their Xmas powers on the closest enemy to them. Shield Ospreys will stop giving shield entirely, and Ancient Healers will stop affecting units around them with their aura. They will only try and heal themselves. The one thing that you should always be aware of is that the enemies affected by Chaos will attack the closest target to them, and that does include Nyx. So if a Bombard sees you closer to him than any other affected enemy by Chaos, he will still know you with that Rocket of Doom. So a little bit of synergy with something like Mind Control or Pacifying Bolts here can really help to boost Nyx's survivability and make sure that she just doesn't get turned on by the closest enemy. Chaos is also now recastable, and when modded correctly, you can get a very high duration and a very large range. This is an incredible crowd control ability and can be refreshed as many times as is needed. This is one of the strongest crowd control abilities in the game, and an ability that people have modded for and modded with in mind ever since she came out, which is amusing since I remember the forums complaining about how Chaos was going to be rubbish before she even came out originally. It's strange that how it works that 3 years later, it's still one of the best crowd control abilities in the game that people mod specifically for and always have, and it's been made better with the quality of life buff allowing it to be recasted. And onto her fourth and final ability, which is Absorb. She enters a meditative state, allowing her to absorb any incoming damage and being immune to any crowd control. She has a passive damage absorption of 200 per second. This passive absorption has a minimum damage of 1500, and any damage more than that threshold is released as a wave of psychic energy as magnetic damage over 10 meters when Nyx leaves her absorb. That wave will also knock down any enemy within the range. Now, Absorb is a toggleable ability that drains energy over time, but it will also drain additional energy for every 1000 damage dealt to her. The damage is not only taken by enemy fire, but also friendlies can contribute and charge the Absorb as well to make sure you do some serious damage. The ability will end and will automatically release if Nyx runs out of energy. Range obviously affected by range mod, duration helps and working with efficiency to bring down the toggle drain and obviously the initial cost, and power strength increases the minimum damage from Absorb as well as increasing that passive damage increase. Now it's worth knowing that Energy Siphon and Zenuric Energy Regen will also be disabled while in Absorb. Now this is another ability that honestly I'm not a huge fan of. It has its uses, however it's not one that I really like. Personally, the main thing about this ability, the damage absorb, I've never thought it's been any good at all. Most of the time you go into absorb, the enemies just ignore you entirely and go after your allies more than they do you. Either that or you're going to absorb, and while you're waiting for the damage to stack up, your allies just nail the guys that are shooting at you, so the damage stacks up so slowly. Either that or there's nothing left for you to even use that stacked up damage on when you do finally need to release. In addition to that, the fact that you can have your allies stack damage on your own absorb is open for people to abuse so badly. I've had it so many times that when I try and use absorb tactically, one of my squad mates decides he doesn't like it very much and stacks so much damage on my absorb that it runs me out of energy so ridiculously quickly it's unreal. Stands next to you with a brack and bam, there goes all of your energy. Super frustrating and open to so much team trolling. It's amazing this feature has actually stayed. All this ability is to me, honestly, is a quick knockdown when you need it. Toggle absorb on, toggle it off immediately for that knockdown, or I use it for being an emergency invincibility if I'm in danger of going down. I don't bother trying to stack the damage, especially with magnetic being almost useless for everything except shielded units. It suffers so much from damage reduction, it drops off so quickly. I just don't bother trying to mod for strength to try and get the damage out of this at all. There is just no point in my eyes. It kind of works solo, but as a team ability when Nyx is an incredible asset to team play, this ability does absolutely nothing for me. Now we're going to move on to modding Nyx Prime now. So it comes with a V and a D and a dash as standard, and also a dash in the aura. Going to add 2 former, which is another 2 dashes. Now this build is very much a focused chaos build. In terms of survivability, we've got redirection. It's going to work with Arcane Barrier. It's going to work with Protect on Kubros and the Guardian mod on Sentinels. We've also got Prime Flow on here, which is going to give us enough energy to continuously recast, and that's going to work with the Arcane Energize that I also have on this frame. Now, we're going to go very much max range, max duration for this build. It's very much a standard Chaos build at this point. So for range, we're going to go Overextended, Cunning Drift and Stretch. And the reason I go with Cunning Drift rather than another one of the Drift mods is because for duration, I've got a 3 from the top narrow-minded on here. And it's trying to balance, the thing about this build is very much about trying to balance the range loss from narrow-minded versus the duration increase from narrow-minded. So that's why I go for the 3 from the top and I don't go with any higher, because otherwise that power range drop becomes a little bit too much for my liking, and it's just not worth it to get that increased duration over that range loss. So we're going to use Prime Continuity in conjunction with that to give more duration. And then obviously we've got Fleeting Expertise and Streamline to give us that efficiency. So the reason I'm using a 2 from the top Fleeting Expertise is because then we lose only 5% of our efficiency, but we gain an extra 10% duration. If you check out a 1 from the top Fleeting Expertise, it's 50% power duration loss, whereas a 1 from the top, a 2 from the top is only a 40% duration decrease. So that 5% loss of efficiency is made up for with 10% duration, which for me, especially on a Chaos build, I find to be so much more useful. Second build is what I've been messing around with for Pacifying Bolts. Once again, Corrosive Projection. We've got Cunning Drift and Stretch on here for range, so we're not going to screw over our Chaos too much. Prime Continuity and Constitution, which is going to give us the extra duration, so once again, Chaos is still relevant. Streamline and Fleeting Expertise for that efficiency. Prime Flow for the power increase, and Redirection for the survivability. And then the Pacifying Bolts augment. And I found this build to work very well for that Pacifying Bolts augment. And if I was going to use Chaos Sphere, I dropped Stretch for Chaos Sphere. This is exactly the same build as my Chaos build, except that we drop the Stretch mod for Chaos Sphere. I'm not a huge fan of this build. It's not one that I would use very often. I much prefer the straight up standard, I guess, cookie cutter Chaos build. This is definitely the build I use all of the time, and it's one that actually works incredibly well for me. Obviously, like always, builds are going to be personal preference. Not everyone's going to agree with all of the mods I've put on. However, if this works as a guideline for you, just to show you how I've gone about modding things and how sort of it affects my own playstyle, and how I combine that with mods on Sentinels, on Kubros, with the Arcanes, then I'm glad if it's actually managed to help you, come up with some ideas for your own build if you're not quite 100% happy with this one. So do I think the Nyx is worth the time and effort to grind and then to max out? The answer is yes, of course I do. Even though I don't like Psychic Bolts, I don't like Absorb that much. The combination of Mind Control and Chaos makes her one of the best crowd control frames in the game, even to this day. The change from a minimum duration, maximum range build Nyx, back from when Chaos was not recastable, to the max duration, max range recastable Chaos was so easy. Really brought Mind Control back into being a huge part of her arsenal. That minimum duration build severely hurt Mind Control, to the extent where it just simply was not worth using at all. It was really weird. Simply making Chaos recastable was like a mini rework for her, giving her more options than simply building around Chaos. She's not an easy frame to play. she can't take much of a hit at all, especially since you don't have a lot of room for survivability mods. So more than a lot of frames, she relies on that crowd control to do the survivability job for her, making sure that you keep your abilities running and paying attention to the area around you to make sure that you don't get blindsided by a chaos enemy that has decided that you're the closest target to him. She's a very active frame. You can't really switch off because you will die so quickly, it's unreal. In terms of arcanes that I use for her, I use Arcane Energize, which is absolutely amazing for making sure that you always have energy for keeping Chaos and Mind Control running constantly. Especially if you combine it with the fantastic energy regen from Zenuric, you will almost literally never be out of energy, keeping both your crowd control and your survivability running. The other one that I know that I use very, very often is Arcane Barrier. It means that as soon as you take a hit, you have an 8% chance of restoring the entirety of your shields. That combined with the Guardian mod that I run on my Sentinel, or Protect from my Raxacubro, really working together with that redirection. Plus the new mod Mediray on my Sentinel to deal with HP loss from either Slash procs or Toxin procs. It's a nice little top up on that health. Finally though, people talk about Warframe in the sense of Fashion Frame being the end game right now, and Nyx has my favourite skin in the game, the Nemesis skin. Nemesis was by far the most badass character in Dark Sector, which I played before Warframe, and for that skin to come for a frame I was already playing, that was it for me. She was destined to be my favourite without fail. Okay, so she's not perfect. A couple of her abilities are not really the strongest, but she is so good at crowd control. She more than makes up for those shortfalls, and it makes me love using her even more because she isn't perfect. If you've not tried her, she's definitely worth checking out. Hopefully you'll enjoyed her as much as I do. I don't know why that was so difficult to say, but as always, I would love to hear your feedback on her in the comments, and I shall see you all in the next video.